our agenda, but I know we talked about it, about the right for all people to vote. And you and I have had some discussions about the demographic turnouts and changes and everything. So I want to talk about that a little bit here. And we'll go into all of them because at least, and you and I kind of had a heated text discussion about this. And so I wanted to hear kind of.
I didn't feel like it was heated though. I didn't feel like it was heated. It was certainly lively.
It was lively. It was lively. Look, like it was. I felt intense. I was like, oh man, at the time. But from a storytelling perspective and the narrative, I thought the election, the way it was unfolding, was so poetic. In this, it felt like a movie. So in June, George Floyd is murdered, and we go through. We've had months of protest and change, and lots of people who look like me doing deeper exploration about the history of racism, the things that they do every single day that have added to the inequality in the world. And then we get to this election, and not only we mentioned all these black women who are making a huge difference to change the election, but as the votes are coming in, what we're seeing is Donald Trump is leading in most of these states, and then we see Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta all having ballots still coming in, right? Cities that are predominantly black, right? Historically suppressed, right? And those votes are the ones that are getting counted last and coming in and flipping the narrative and the direction of where the election was going, to where we got to this point where all of a sudden it was like, oh, Joe Biden won Wisconsin, he won Minnesota, he won Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania. And I also want to give a shout out to Arizona, because Arizona went blue a lot thanks to all of the votes by Native Americans and all those tribes that turned out. They deserve a huge shout out for what they did in Arizona as well. And these oppressed groups of people coming, and because their votes came in or were counted last, it just happened to be the narrative of like, look at these communities changing the election. That was just circumstance because of the way votes were counted specifically in those states. But you and I kind of went back and forth, and so what do you think about that? Do you have any thoughts on that before we kind of keep going? And then I want to address the people who voted for Donald Trump as well.
The reason why we were going back and forth on that was because you were like, oh, this is great. And I was like, actually, I don't agree with the way the story is being told, because it sounds as if, the voters in these states were somehow doing something different than what all the other voters were doing. But it was, what they should have said is that the process, we talked about this earlier, that the process prioritized other people's votes first. So the reason why so many black voters were voting by mail was because of the pandemic. They were concerned about going and voting in person. And so in the places where it was an option for them, they took advantage of it. The Democratic Party really promoted that. So most of these voters voted blue. And so that's all there is to it. And for the election systems in those states, they prioritized the in-person vote that day first on election day, and then the mail-in ballot after. And so this was already predicted to happen. And Donald Trump himself actually said that this was his language strategy, right? So his language strategy before election day was, I will be shown to have been the winner on election day, because all of the ballots that will be counted on election day will be for me, because Republican voters traditionally vote in person on election day. That is exactly what happened. And he also said, any of these mail-in ballots are fraudulent, any of them. Any ballots that are counted after election day are fraudulent. So he was laying the groundwork for then what would become his legal argument. And while his legal argument may have fallen apart,
Uh-oh, we had a technical difficulty for all the listeners out there. The video people won't see this, but if you're listening to the podcast, all right, we're back.
all right. So, so what I was saying was that Donald Trump laid the sort of the rhetorical foundation to then be able to have the public relations so angle that he could play, but then also allowed him to have this foundation for why he was going to put these lawsuits forward. So the strategy was very clear from the very beginning. And I think what's important about that is we should not, although the narrative makes us feel good, to be able to say, well, look at that. These black voters, they showed up and then they just flipped this thing around. That's not what happened. They voted at the same time as everybody else. Yeah. And in fact, they probably voted before everyone else. Yeah. But their votes were not prioritized in the process. And that is the key. And this is why, for me, it's so important to understand the process, because at the same time that we have to understand the process, we also have to understand how the process will be used against people and challenged, because that's exactly what Republicans have been doing. In Texas, it was the drive-through voting. In all of these other states where there were mail-in ballots, it was the mail-in ballot that they were challenging, because they saw that as somehow an opportunity legally to be able to suppress votes, because they could say, well, the ballots were somehow cast illegally. And that has been, to this day, we continue to hear that. And I believe we're going to continue to hear that for the next 4 years, to cast doubt on the election system, but specifically where there are large populations of people of color, whether it's the Native American population in Arizona, or the Latino population in Nevada, or the African American population in Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Milwaukee. That's the other side of this, right? That's the other side that we might be thinking, hey, this is the great story that we want to tell ourselves that makes us feel good. The story that's being told on the other side is that these people are frauds. They're doing illegal things. They're trying to ruin democracy. Like, that's the story. And I think we need to be really clear about that and understand that we have some work to do to strengthen our system. It is not enough to say, great, these folks turned out. It is not enough to say that, yes, in this one election, in this one particular race, not in all of the races now, in this one particular race, these voters of color showed up and they overcame all of the barriers, the pandemic, the systemic tactical voter suppression. They overcame all of that, whether they had financial issues or issues of transportation or whatever, childcare issues. They overcame all of that to get their vote in. Yes. We shouldn't look at that as being, in my view, we shouldn't look at that as being the standard or to be great. We actually should work to make that better for people's lives. It should be easier to vote, and we shouldn't have to have these heroic stories of, look at this giant group of people from one population overcoming all of this to cast a ballot. This is your constitutional right. It should be just as easy for someone who looks like you as it is for someone who looks like me. And it should be just as easy for someone who is disabled as it is for someone who is able, just as easy for a woman as it is for a man. That's what I take away when I hear that story. I'm like, no. We're focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah, I mean, and you really opened up my eyes to that, right? Because I was the one like cheering, like, oh, look at this narrative, like that's such a beautiful thing, and you really opened my eyes. It was like, yeah, but there's like all this tale, like, yeah, we're cheering this Disney fairy tale moment when it's like it shouldn't have even had to be that way in the first place.
Right.
And I want to bring this up, and I think we're going to have a future episode about this because we've kind of initiated the conversation. Yes, it's great that all of these people of color showed up and they voted and they had their voice heard. But we can't discount the fact that 70 million white people showed up and voted against that, right? And voted against the safety of people who look like you, right? And supporting all the conspiracies and all the suppression and all of the terrible things, not only historically, but in the last 4 years that we have seen the lies and the name calling and all of the non-presidential things. Like, white people, what the hell? Like, it's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. We have a history as white people in America of terrible, terrible, terrible decisions against our neighbors and our fellow citizens, also immigrants as well. And there's a reckoning that's going to need to come in order for us to actually have the America that we all have pie in the sky, that we think America could be, or what we want America to be, or what we think the Constitution is designing America to be. And white people think that exists, right? Because for most of white America, it does exist, right? And we don't think about the ways the systems are built that 100x, probably more, benefit us because of the way we look, pretty much exclusively because of the way we look. And this election, I hope, it was big on me, right? Because I was optimistic that we were going to have what everyone's saying, the repudiation of Donald Trump, and all these people were going to fire him. And I mean, it was 1% difference. Yes, it was 5. We're looking at 6 million votes, but 70 million people do not agree really with what we're saying at all right now. Right. And that is it's great. The people of color deserve all the applause and all of this credit. Yes. But as a culture of white people in a country that is at this point, majority still white, you and I both agree that eventually that's not going to be the case. And that will be a big difference. That's naturally going to happen. But we've got a lot of stuff to do. We got a lot of work to do within our own communities, right? I have family that I know support the Republican Party, and whether they voted for Trump or they didn't, I know people that voted for Trump. That's what it comes down to in my friend circle and in my family circle. And so it is our responsibility to continue to address and fight and advocate and stand up, right? Because it's not acceptable, and there's there should be more burden on people who look like me to be the change. We are if we're the ones that have the power, it's going to be up to us to change that dynamic. And white people as a whole, we've let you down, right? And we got to do better, and we can't give up, right? This is a very small battle that we won. Great to celebrate and cheer and dance in the street. Hopefully you're wearing a mask and you're practicing social distancing, because that was a little concerning too. But today, right? Things haven't changed systemically, right? Great. We got 2 people in the White House, but there is so much more work to do in our local communities, in our personal relationships, in our places of work, from top to bottom, that isn't ending today, and it's not over. And I want to put it out there. White people, we got to do better.
Thank you for saying that. I don't even have I don't even want to say anything else beyond that, because that was so well articulated, and I'm very appreciative of you saying that, because there are a couple of things that triggered our discussion on this topic, offline, and it had a lot to do with some memes that I guess you call these memes. These days I don't know what's a meme and what's not, because some things are more informative, and then other things I'll just call it some educational content, but it was definitely an opinion piece, because social media is where people get their news these days. And so, maybe you would have read something like this in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, 20, 30 years ago, and now you come across it on social media. I don't even know who the author of it was. I have no idea. But there were some things about what you just said that were, that resonated with me, that I saw within that. And I sent it to you, and I said, part of it is in the conversation, right, that we have. It's like the black voters who voted for Trump, or the black voters who voted for Biden, or the Latino voters who voted for Trump versus voted for Biden. It's like, okay, but what about the white voters? Like, white voters also are a group. And I think that is the challenge, right? That even within the media landscape, there is so much focus on the other that we are and we're distracted by that sometimes, when we really need to say, yeah, but what about the largest group and the standard that we are set, that is set, that creates the other, right? Yes. So that I think that's something I feel like now I